Coming in AC trackings. Arranging your system lines of trackers and line connections to communications and data ports. It's a life support system and its own system how to get into your traffic and your runways. Setting lines of course is really understand how to modify the system location of your system through the body of the gain metric modulation settings. Know how to use your Wi-Fi, know how to use your modem, know how to use your satellites, and how to use your towers of communications. It's all lines inside your system. So getting in that track centers really gets in position all levels. How to use that through your life support system is all through your power cell. Now your power cell knows exactly where it is in time frame. Setting lines and voice line grids of patterns. It opens all sequence location in your systems, all through your gain modifications and your modulation systems. So understanding the position at all levels, that's all communicated to its settings. So it's kind of like having a direct line link, how to communicate to the lines and settings to its consciousness of its awareness of its TV, knowing exactly how to see it in position location to its measure and scale, how to communicate with its letters, numbers, shapes, and its symbols that modifies its own system, its own traffic, of its own runway, of its own highway. It has its own modulation screen that puts its own location setting to its all calculator modify that sets and lines into its filters. Now there's a filter on and there's a filter off. Setting direct lines of signals is ground lines of surface attractions. For example, get line screen, box frame, TV frame. 3 lines of box correlates in setting the travel communications. Okay? This indicates all lines of power. The generation screen has a high line signal. Now getting into that signal processes communications along the different angles. Different angles modificates the ground lines of settings. High lines of service, high lines of travel, high lines of indication system, all through setting. Okay? Setting communication lines of grounds sets lines of your CCTV. Now your CCTV has a core center that directs signals to its foundation grounds how to get in the modification next level of the gain. Getting to the next level of the gain, the box frame or triangulation frame is all through TV reception of its own system. So you got flux over screen, flux over anomaly, flux over travel, flux over lines of time, lines of setting. Process lines of 3 settings, 3 angles, and flux over screen. Direct lines of 3 channels of operation, 3 signals, grounds. So you get 3 signal dials, past, present, future. Setting position of past, set position of present, and set lines of future interactions. Okay, that's how it indicates to a TV. So when you're connecting to all the dials, anything through all of the remote control, everything's a past, present, future. That's a constant connection system. I created the game, all of nothing. Now the nothing of itself coordinates its own self, its own modulation system, puts everything of its mind self, its game itself, and the operation of itself. Now understand how to use that in information setting is understanding how to use your finger points, lines of track centers. You guys have your quiz on that exactly, and that example gets lines of communication, how to push the buttons of everything you see and conscious of its awareness. Now it has a core centers lines of tapestry. Now tapestry is a mirror on a wall. Setting lines of course lines of travel has line screen adaptations and snowy graph interference of 3 channels and communications. Now getting direct lines of link, this is where it comes into the aura. The aura and the line connection settings, the operation lines of course center of its relays, satellites to its Wi-Fi to its modem. So everything you're touching, you're automatically touching the screen adaptation of its TV reception and timelines of setting. The process of communication to its TV self sets line screen adaptations and 3 lines of signals going forward in traction. So you got TV sectors, TV lines, TV sequence, and 4 lines of panel. So you sync the lines of course centers. You're here, setting lines of travel, okay, and you touch the TV, right? Not touch it, because you scanning. So you got to be at least, I'd say, line position location setting like high travels, 2 feet line rotation in the body frame, setting line 1/2 inch, sending direct signals location system. Just enough before you touch the TV, right? Because it's scanning your modulation setting. Process of communications. All right, so as it's set position lines, it opens up the panel, opens up the sequence and TV lines, of course, centers of stargates and portals. Stargates, portals, 4 lines of settings, 3 lines of track centers, and 3 lines of measure, and 3 lines of setting, and 4 set lines of sequence. Setting lines of grounds. Now, in that communication system, the ground lines of setting, the set position of the TV line has a TV receptor line of screen. Setting lines of attractions, all right, has high signal locations. Downshift lines anomaly, and 3 lines of graph and communication setting. Process lines of indication lines of earth, ether, core, firmaments, and travel and communications. All right, so It's amazing how you see the central line of its communication of decentralized. It operates the signal location to its sending off the travel. Panels operational lines directly into communications. I need the team to come into the modification consciousness and create the traffic of its inventory. You got to create your own traffic, your own inventory, so your line communications get into space modulations of balance, and how to use your finger points and point lines of graph or power points. Setting lines of travels and direct lines of signals and ground lines of calculation, screen lines adaptation. Okay, so you got to be right about here to communicate with the phone, and the phone responds back. And when it responds back, it sets up tone measure, tone scales, calculation, modification, ground lines, high lines of service, sets position lines of 0, 1 attractions, triangulation, flux, box frame, position of configuration, of face recognitions. So when you're doing this, and it recognizes, see my face, watch. See that one more time? Right? So it's a plasma screen. So the configuration of face recognition comes out and sees you. And knows who you are, goes back in his phone. Okay? So you guys are coming at that level in sequence now. But you have to understand how to coordinate settings of travels and position your planetary screen definitions of flux over screen. So when you're touching everything in travel, that's what you're coming into, past, present, future, all in setting. Okay, so you got ETH core 1, ETH core 2, DX line, X platform of 6 over 7 over pi. The process calculates lines are 3 lines of indication setting to your pyramids. Pyramids come in line screen. 3 signals of platforms and direct lines of 1 panel. Process lines that indicate settings, lines of travel. Okay, platform sequence, platform grounds, platform track relations to its setting. Process indicates settings of travels, indirect lines of links, line screen light adaptations, high set interference into setting to travels, directing lines of indication system all through the platform. Okay, and then you open up the panels, electrical line grids, and set lines of travel. Sets communicates high centers in position locations, high levels of routes and routers in positional levels to an XT1000. Okay, XT1000 comes in, upswings and down cross location screen lines, 3 inhibitors over screen, sets CERNs and 6 lines of measure. You can set flux of 3 lines and 3 lines of measure and set position lines of travel. Setting lines, sequence lines up and down and sequence lines of panel and past, present, future interactions. Setting direct line signals in traffic communication setting over inside and outside position lines at high positions, inside the TV. And that's what you're seeing inside the TV itself. And the face is right here in interactions, right here in settings. There's the face and system locations. There's the face. See the 2 eyes? So as it comes out in frame. See the eye line screen adaptation of the system coming out through interactions, out through setting, right? And once it formulates, it shows its base. There's its base and position out in lines of sequence. Setting lines of X marks the spot. As it comes out in sequence, it's now in platitude to visual location of your system, trying to stand you through intelligence, information, location, and grounds. Comes out in set position. See? Comes out in set position. Okay, your configuration is purple, right? The line signal is purple. This is purple. That's the connection. Right? That's the balance. Purple over purple. All right, so setting lines of signals is an indicator line is setting. The process that communicates lines of 3 lines of value. Now, in that position, the TVCs, you have a box frame, lines of circuitry, screen adaptations of setting and travel. Sets lines of 3 signals, process 3, and 2 lines of 1 set position lines of communications. 3 angles, getting communication lines of ground lines of service, sets position location red. Now, red indicates the security lines of panels. And process communication where you come in interactions and setting. The overriding sequence comes in red over sequence, over lines, over signal, over coordinates, over lines, and Pluto and truck correlates and settings, security lines of map, and position location, all levels of motivation, grounds, and set attractions, all through TV receptor. That's what you get when you touch a TV. All line settings, all frame. Okay. So now you just have to understand how to get your own traffic, your own inventories. The quiz is all based on what you already know in set position. But as I created the game, I created all formations of nothing, which is the mass of everything, how to use it through the energy, the vibration, the frequencies, and harmonics of the circuits that you are in 144 in position, location, tethered to everything, but detached from everything attractions. Now, what you have to modify now is to understand when you're touching things, you're touching position, location, and settings. If you take your lines of course centers, you indicate lines of an arrow. Okay? And an arrow basically touches a lamp. Let's get position lines of a lamp and set position lines of travel. Okay, you got the top end and you got the base. Okay, and you got the bottom. Okay, and you're touching that, right? So as soon as you're touching that, it puts up its fields. It's protecting itself because it doesn't know who you are, right? To identify your system, it scans you 3 lines of tractions. Indirect signal, okay? So you're here in settings, set position. So you're going through 7 plasma screens, okay, interactions to its intelligence of its formations. 4 lines of settings and position lines of 5 sequence lines of pattern, direct signal, inline core center lines of travel communications, just to connect with the lamp. So that's where your finger goes. It goes through 7 panels of operation. So what you have to start identifying now, the actual settings of the lamp comes to you now. Through all lines of 6, all lines of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. There's the indication of setting, right? So you're taking it out of its plasma, you come in out position of its plasma screen line adaptation of the flux over 7 lines of panels, process in the lines of intercourse at calculation setting interception, directing lines in the mind interception case setting and position lines of tractions. But that's what happens when you touch things and set tractions. Once it identifies you and you identify, you automatically communicate with each other through pi. Okay, but it's all lines and all signals all at once. Okay, that's a continuous force. So now you're having a conversation with your lamp, and your lamp's having a conversation with you in set position. Now change the frame communication lines, deletes and lines, travels, direct signal lines of grounds, and high lines of service. Let's set a green lines of settings. Process line indicates the system. Setting core centers, 0s and 1s in setting inside the lamp itself, but it's all green. It's not blue, it's not red, it's just green. That's where it is in its consciousness of its real-time measure and real scale in its gain modulation setting. That puts all communicates in setting the sum of all that is. Okay, so the lamp is all the yellow, it's all position of green. Okay, green 0s. So you have to modify that line screen adaptations, flux over 3, setting lines of 3, lines of position over 4, or flux. Sets ground, set course centers, lines of travel, directing lines of ground, communication setting, process, and track location of system. So we get green lines of indication settings and platforms of platforms. Over processing screen adaptations, all track correlates in setting and travel. Indirect signals modification. Okay? So you're seeing where the consciousness is in real time. You're governing what's understanding where it is in its own operation, its own time, and remote. It's a remote viewing, but it's seeing you in set position of this. Same lines as seeing you security, which is your anxiety and stress. That's how the lamp sees you. Right? So that's an override there, set tractions. So you have to get a direct line link with the set of the lamp where it is in lines of real time and remote. 7 lines of panels, 7 lines of track centers. So you get a center core system. It gets complicated, guys, very confusing. Your panels core lines are 3 lines of angles and 3 setters of indication setting and grounds. So the position of process lines, override signals, lines of 3 line, ground line, core centers, and T reception, screen definition, and open windows. Setting cross centers, lines of travel, direct lines of link over cross location of screens, and 3 lines of flux over travel. Directing lines of indication high centers of line windows and 3 lines of communication lines of travel. Calculate and modify high centers of lines of communication inside and outside through calculations. Okay, seeing it from this angle, seeing it from that angle, come in that setting, inside and out in set position. Inside tractions, indirect signals, and ground lines of surface. Okay, so you see the angles here. Webbing graph screens, angles and point lines of calculation setting to all levels of gain modulation setting, processing communication lines, depth over screen, platitude in box frames, and communication next level of the game. Okay, so in that communication line grounds, once you get a timeline measure and scale, you get the highest information of the game, right? So the highest score. Now, when you get into the highest score, you set position locations to your name lines of screen. So you got your name here, that's your name, right? And you got names here that's already played the game. It's that position of box frame, right? This is the box frame of the game itself. Modulation setting and travel communication setting, operation sequence, line position of panels to a set calculation setting to its game itself. All right? Okay. So you get signature lines of panels and names, and you got the highest information of the score. Okay, there's the score right there above in sequence, right? Now, what you understand, the indication lines is a 12-line settings. 1, 2, 12,300. Is the higher information, so everybody else below. So they're 11,000, some position location 10,000, line position 9,000, right? Top of the game, right? But you're the highest formations, right? So you take the brackets of the indicates and setting at 12,300, right? And you turn it into the modulation of 0s and 1s and set tractions. So basically that changed the game. So what that does, it changed the modification of the grounds of the game level and engineering skills at 3 levels of the game to the next level of its setting and travel. Sets modulations of 1, set modulations of 3, set middle location lines of 4, and track communications. Directing lines of panels, small centers of dimensional door screens, adaptations of flux over screen. Flux over setting, process lines of indicating system over tractions, over division location to its system. Okay? Gets more complicated to dimensional doors. Setting lines of sequence, setting lines of panels, optical grid signals, in lines of indication system. So you can see doors on both side angles and one set position line and 3 lines of measure. Scales communications, high lines of grounds, high position of 3 lines of measure on windows and track communications. Setting open lines of frames, box frames, triangulation frames of flux over screen, adaptation. So processing that is all levels and set coordinates of ground correlation setting the dimensional doors. Platform setting, C over D over E over F over G over correlations and track correlation setting and modification system all through travel. Setting communication lines of grounds, set lines of service. Platforms E, factors over screen, directing lines, open window, setting lines of jump guard, directing line course centers, directing lines of indicate system of 3 lines of angles. Here's Pluto and set lines of traction in all direction. Okay? Open windows, open frames, open lines, communication setting, inside line communication to a system. Mapping sequence, mapping panel, mapping operation, screen adaptations. There's your web. Setting wide sequence lines of panels, change the correlations, high set location of game levels and change. Process lines of settings, set position of point graphs. Indicates ground lines of setting in modulation system of game changing. Set lines of signals in communication setting, lines of surface and set position location setting that sets up the compass into its window frames of space lines of anomaly and set track locations. Okay? Indicate point lines of graph has a line signal. Now we change that point lines, screen lines of measure. Points lines of system of the settings. Overline sequence in line screen. Mapping lines of panel operates in real time. Setting course centers lines of travel and direct signal. Setting ground lines inside in line rotation outside line communications. Point lines of tractions, setting communications. XV1000 comes in center position. 3 lines of settings and 3 lines of outline rotation setting and traction. Okay? Open all signals inside rotation to a set location to its game modulation system. Setting lines of travels, indirect lines of view, and set position lines of communications. Oh, look at that. We already got position lines of high setting. We got a shark. And set tractions in the direction. Right? So there's a shark inside the game. So we have to understand how this all works inside the webbing system that we bring in thoughts, actions, and emotions. So it changes all core centers, setting lines of core centers like connections. It's like Hungry Hippos. You remember that game where you basically get that, you get all those balls in a set location, and whoever eats all the connections, all of the balls itself wins the game? That's what it is. It's like Hungry Hippos. Setting lines of egos are any line core centers and set correlations, high track communication system, the game modulation centers of travel. Set skull communication setting lines of surface and set tractions in set lines communication of center operation U and set calculations. All right. So in that position, once you get the high score, we create the traffic inventory. Now the inventory basically has a space modulation setting. Window graph screens. So we have an open window panel and position lines of traction centers. Okay. Setting sequence this way in travel. Okay. And then we process the platforms of 3, 2, 1, and set position of 0 gravity. Platform C, platform D, platform A, platform G. G lines of 1, G lines of 2, and track communications. All right, then we stand in the center point and set position here in travel. Okay, in travel. Okay, so get into the game modulations into your geoline patterns, your high sequence correlation setting, and platform communications. All right? All right. So once you get in that position line centers, then you get into high position locations of window frames and ceiling lines of tractions and direct signals of grounds. Platform setting over lines of sequence, 3 lines of measure, 3 lines of scale, 3 lines of communication, overline sequence, overline communication system, all through travel. There's the ceiling. Okay, so we have the ground line settings. Process lines of 1 indicates the setting has a platform over triangulation. Over cross locations, overline signal. Outside, inside rotation, inside track communications. All right, so we have a platform downline cross location setting and measure, scales communication, 3 lines of angles, and process of communication system. Now, directing lines of angles. This is an online communication setting, how you set measurement and scales. Indicates over cross screens. Directing signals in travel into panels of communication lines of setting. Okay, setting sequence on the opposite system, location online, offline, off gridding, online position location measure and scale communications. inside, outside through tractions, and direct signals, ground lines of service. So I'm trying to get you guys to understand the gain modulation of nothing that processes everything through its gain. And once you understand how to get into the game itself, the game changes itself. It changed the motivations of itself. It changed the activities of itself. It changed the mobilities of itself. It changed everything of the angles of itself and set tractions and all direct signal. So the more you come into the mind of conception, the more you come all lines of freedom and sovereignty in all position, location, and measure, and how to scale that in all communication lines of angles in all communication lines of surface and traction. Okay? So it gets more complicated where you basically put in more line screens. Communication lines, your pyramids, and 3 lines of angles and travel communications. Our 4 lines of flux in the apse of direct signals, cross line angles, high set location and setting, and wall sequence lines of screen datation. So there's so many ways to look at yourself in all communication systems, all through travels, all through direction. All different angles and setting, all right? Inside and outside tractions. Okay, very powerful stuff. So your game gets more complicated in perspective and how you see it in travel. And then you look at the angle points. Ground lines settings, let's change the platform to C. All right, change the platform to C. Now I'm going to change the platform to D and A over X over platform over 1. 3 set lines of course, lines of travel. Indicates lines of flux and 3 lines of signals and travel communications. All right, so different platform, different setting, different space, different time, different modulation system. All right, change communication lines of grounds, open line signals. Now we have an open window frame. Let's get a graph frame in position of a window frame that sets course center of the central frame. Flash drive and communication center inside traction. All right. Now we see a planet over here in a left line angle, which is all ovals, sets communication lines of Saturn and travel. Inside outside lines. And then we see high course centers, archetypes going this way, and direct signals into 1x8000 in set position inside traction. Okay, so now you're seeing outside, which is with inside you. So I'm trying to get you guys to understand how to see the true self inside lines in metric meters and scale, and understand how to see the outline position of its window frame and see everything else in set position existing all at once. Sets positional laws of travel communications and track communications. All right, so we're going to set up tubing. Set tubing from ground lines over line sequence. 3 lines of measure and 3 line communication of primers and 4 lines of communication setting and travel. Okay, it's getting more complicated, but a lot more fun through all okay position time frame. All right, so we set up tubing. We bold the screen lines of fonts, change course centers lines of travel, direct lines, and geometric lines of shapes. This is all done through 0s and 1s, guys. 0s and 1s in set position. All right, it's getting more exciting now, right? Because you're truly understanding how to set up the game and modulation setting to turn it into a game changer. Game changer is basically changing the plateaus and how to see the game into all of the creating, not what you already are in memory of sequence. So it's a lot more fun when you just really get understanding how to get into that position location setting that changes everything in tractions and all direct signals into ground lines of surface and triangulation flux and set lines of communications. Okay? So it gets more complicated when you really get inside and inside traction. Okay? It gets more complicated when you see it. All through schematics, all through drawing. Okay? So you have more fun with that because you're game changing things. Right? You already know how to play the game, which is nothing. Right? Now you just have to truly understand how to formulate and simulate and track locations. Create it to another modulation game. Create it to another modulation space game. Create it to another cross-line communication of the game, inside calculations. Right? Different lines of angles, different lines of platforms. Now we're on the platforms of grounds. There's the grounds, another game. There's the TV, set position. Now here, I'm going to drop down and see the center operation of me. So same lines of sequence, same lines of travel. Now I'm looking and sitting down in the game itself, looking at the window frame and lines of course centers existing on the once in travel. Okay, Spider-Man here, upside down. Now I'm here watching TV on the platform. So it's really interesting when you see the conduit and set position, location, measure, and scale, and understand how to go through north, west, south, and east. Yes, Spider-Man, see? Spider-Man upside down. But if I do it this way, Spider-Man is inside its vessel. Spider-Man is now in position, location, and center of the panel. Okay? So there's always ways to see yourself in all lines of travel and set positions of communications. Right? That's the game changer. Understanding the game itself is nothing. I formulate and simulate it through your server. But what you have to start identifying is how to change that game change. Change your system, change your traction, change your direction. right? Modify the system, modify the calculations. You can't do that in memory. You'll stay in your memory. I didn't create a game through a memory. I created the game of nothing, which is the mass of everything. I didn't create the game with instructions. You are your instructions. You are your ascension. You are your masters inside your game in real time, in real measure, in real scale, in real balance. But when you get into the game changer, you're changing things. You're moving things. You're directing things. You're getting connections of this. You're getting connections of that. And you're constantly getting into abundance of real things, of real time. You're getting into reading a new book. You're getting into watching a new movie. You're watching this. You're watching that. You're doing this. You're doing that. You're changing all levels of you inside the game. You're seeing different levels of you inside the game. Hooah! If I platform in set lines of high centers, lines of travel, have a direct lines, I can modify my system to be everywhere all at once and travel. Sending communications on high centers of grounds. Now in position locations, I'm in the sideline fencing and panels of communication setting to travel. All through pi. Right? There's the door. So I went through the door and now I'm there. So I'm constantly game changing myself and changing. So what I'm doing, I'm also changing reality in real time that's affecting everything in time of me. That's a course of recognition, a force of recognition system that changes all, calculate, modify, and travel. So you've seen yourself flux in 4 different angles, changing everything inside that changes everything outside, all levels of you inside and setting in all track communications. All right? So it's really interesting when you see that in all different angles in set position. So I'm here, 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 right? Add signals lines, let's add ground lines of surface. Okay, ground lines of surface of panels. Okay, you've got 2 panels and we're going to work within cycle. We're working with inside the game now. So I'm changing the game modulation system on my server. Okay, in position locations, interactions to my pyramid. Here's my pyramid inside now. Walking sequence, locking panels. Here's an open portal. I'm going through a travel communications now. See how it changed the game itself, right? It's a different lines of level. Inside and outside attractions all at once. Okay? So it's very powerful when you guys come into that. Okay? And how to see that in the motivation system all through set position lines of calculations. So you're constantly changing the schematics. You're constantly changing time. You're constantly changing space. You're constantly changing your foundations. You're constantly changing your operations of your clockings. Every second, every minute, every hour of the game. Right? Now to do that is to come in your traffic of your inventories, of your highest score. When you get in the highest score, you get into the modifications and creating your own modulations and screen lines, adaptation of game changing. You're processing going to the next level. You're going to the higher lines of high position. You're reaching a higher score. So you just keep going up and up and up and up and up with the game that you're in real-time measure and scale and balance. So it's much easier to see yourself in 4 different angles, changing 4 different time measures all at once. In clocking screen and foundation of schematics of a drawing and set position to its measure and scale. So it's very powerful when you start understanding to see yourself in 4 different angles in remote and real time. 4 different angles, guys. Inside, outside, inside, outside, inside, outside, inside, outside, all at once. Existing and evolving and expanding and exploring all at once. And everything is happening on a constant continuous flow that I basically created through creation of creating of the nothing. Okay? I didn't create anything of structure. You did that on your own. I just created the game itself without instructions. See, you can't have a game instruction. You can't have a game in routine because it offlines your position, location, and measure, and you can't create inventory of your networks through zeros and ones, letters, and shapes and symbols. So it's about understanding how to communicate with your game levels and 4 lines of sequence all at once. Being all line core centers, being in 4 different directions all at once in remotes, in a constant continuous flow, in traction. Okay? Watching TV, going through the panels, be inside your teleportation, being on the ceiling. In a constant continuous flow of nothing, but knowing the mass of where I'm going to be next, which is all levels of instructions, how I see fit. Through my binary, through my algorithm, I'm changing my codification system of the next levels of the game, of my instructions. Okay? Not what's given to me. Nothing is given to you. The mind's already set up the game itself, which is the modification of its own self in set position. You're here to identify your server, how to use it into 144,000 frequencies and set design. This is the model. This is the identification system. This is all done through your GOD. And the more you get understanding how to understand this, then you understand that, and then you understand everything's been understood because everything is already in the process of being done. The directions, the operation, your network is just all of just existing. You're living the intelligence of forever existing and the game modulations of you, how you see fit. It benefits you through codifications. How you see your binary, how you see your algorithm, how you see the next levels of your game. And 4 different angles. All through tractions inside position of a high score. So when you get into the high score, then you create the inventory. But you guys have to understand how to modulate that now. So you get a box frame. Okay? So every time you go to the next level of the game, you go to the next level of the game. Game this, game that. So you change the structure, you change the design, but you're constantly changing. You're changing here, you decide to change the box here. Okay? So every time you're doing that, you're changing the box, which is changing the game. That's a game changer, right? It's not a game changer if you just see it through the box. So you're locked in the mind, in one body framing, in one paradigm, in position of 3-dimensional mind or 5-dimensional mind. You don't want to be limited. It's a process line that puts cross-reference setting. It gets you in high lines of sequence how to see yourself changing the game of you through box, or changing yourself through triangulation, adding frames, adding sequence, adding panels, adding traffic, adding new highways, adding traffic communication to the system, all through box, all through triangulations, and the 4-line signals of north, east, west, and south. That's all it is inside of it, guys. Nothing else, nothing more. So once we get into that position, now you understand how to get in position of the positive and negative, everything you get in tractions up. When you touch something in that position location, you're automatically getting in that position location. Are you seeing it through consciousness? Are you seeing through its awareness? Are you seeing what's governing its own space and time, in real time, in real scale, in real balance? Are you seeing that through its own consciousness? Are you seeing it through its own entity force? Are you seeing it through its own psychonism line setting? Are you seeing it through its own psychosis? Are you seeing it through its own electrical impulse? You have a heart. Everything else has a heart, but it's referred as an impulse of the game itself, which is its own game of its own setting. So everything around you is already set up inside of you. So that's where the game itself, that you have to recognize from inside you, you have to understand how to communicate with the game. So once you understand that, then you realize everything around you, you brought in through attraction. You created your own game inside. As you create everything outside, that creates everything inside of you, of the game itself. So it's really interesting when you understand that through platforms. So when you understand your platforms, you understand you through a game changer, right? This is a platform sequence and set tractions. That's one platform, right? So you're here, okay? You're clocking here, and you're clocking here. 3 clocking centers, right? So your body's going to be here, here, and here in 3 cycles, right? Setting position over here, sets lines of 3 angles and setting past, present, and future. Setting track location lines over here, setting like position of time measure and pi. Setting track location lines of 3 lines of measure. Always the 3 lines of measure, past, present, and future, guys. Setting lines of track centers and direct signals and 3 lines of flux over screen, directing lines, all lines signals in all direction signals, location sending to the next level of the game. Okay. That's a game changer on its own. Okay. 3 measures of clock-ins is zeros. 3 layers of lines, core centers, lines of travel, in mechanisms, lines of power, which generates the screen. 3 lines, core centers, and game lines of level. That changes every information system, but you can't do it through your thoughts, your action, emotions. Okay? My game is not created through a memory that doesn't exist. My game is created through all levels of you and all lines of your existing and all levels of your system that puts you into the levels of a game changer that puts you in all lines of modification system, all inside you. The true authentic you is the instructions how to play the game. I don't give you instructions. You are the instructions. You are your ascension. You are your unifications of your mastering of the game. When you master the game, you create another game. Now, when you create another game, you're not doing it in memory. You're getting a high score. Now you're getting into traffic. Now you're getting inventory. Now you're getting all levels of letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. Now you put that all together, you get into hieroglyphics. That's how you communicate with everything around you through consciousness. The lamp might be in hieroglyphics, that's where it's in its space. Your TV might just be in block screen adaptations of triangulation boxes. Your position, your table might just be in zeros and ones. Your connections to your crayons or anything, your pen or pencils might just be in track relation setting of box frames. Everything is in its own concept, its own awareness and travel in communication to the setting, all through directions. All through directions, all through set position. Okay? So once you get into that, it's much easier to understand how to set up the inventories, right? So let's get into all of the rectangle. Okay? And your phone is inside. Okay, inside and outside, right? That's your phone, right? So you're here, setting, that's you, attractions, okay? That's you, right? Now, when you're touching the phone, basically you're going in this position of 3 lines of angle and travel. Okay, directions, right? 3 lines of doors, so position of past, present, and future of center operation of the game itself that puts all lines of formations of nothing. Everything you touch comes into that position, right? 3 lines of angles, that lines of pi, set position of center of pi, and center core system of pi. Sets up sonar of pi of communication lines, echo, sonar, communications, foxtrot, and line communication setting. Okay, all just by touching something, by anything attractions. The center operation lines change the frequency lines of panels, outline signals, process communication, outline set, position of 3 lines of measure and scale. Okay, sends back in correlation system, all through real-time measure and scale in its game modulation system that coordinates the settings and all through travel that modifies the system location of the system. Okay, that's what you get when you can touch things, right? Where it is in travel. So, it's just truly understanding how to really get into the zeros and ones, how to get into online settings. If a box frame in set lines of travel has an indication setting here, right, to turn on the TV, right? As soon as you're on the TV, you're turning on the platform. There's the platform, right? It's already grounded. And you're bringing in the flux. You're bringing in that set. There's the intelligence. I showed you that before, right? So you got the panels and 2 side lines settings. You got the face recognition system in travel. And you got the C lanes of rotation system into position. You got your flux capacitors and 3 lines of angles and travel communication setting. And you have the constant core centers lines of communication system. You can see the intelligence now, right? What it is informations. So it gets in position of the grounds, the powers, the atmospheres, and its highways in set position. Once it comes to that position line centers, it comes in all lines of its face recognition system of travel. There's the intelligence. All right? So there's the intelligence. There's the eyes. See? It's right here in subposition. I hear and I hear. Intelligence, right? That's it. There's the intelligence. Intelligence here, and intelligence here. See? Intelligence here, here, and here. 3 intelligence setting in set position. Just 3 alone, right? All right, so center core centers and electrical line core centers. Okay, into your watts. 4 signals in travel. Okay, it's all connected and it has a 4-box frame. So if you ever see an electrical bulb, a watt of a bulb, a 60 watt, an 80 watt, or 240 watt, or 1000 watt, you can do anything line screen, but it's always in a box frame. So it actually you look inside a light bulb, you'll see it in a box frame, which is a triangulation box. Very powerful stuff, how the wires indicate setting and all line communicates setting the game itself. I created the electrical lines of box frame locates a triangulation box. Knowing exactly how to indicate that through wires of indication setting to your electrical grids. Sets all lines of modification system off through travel through a watt bulb that communicates setting. Pop in the circuits. What does it do in line position? Off lines of settings, everything turns off. Putting it back in position. On lines to see location of 0, 1s and tractions. Knowing rhythm patterns, light metaphors, high travels, and communication lines of surface and tractions. So it's set position, location, measure, and scale. This is the real intelligence information inside the system. This is the true authentic itself. You. See? All love's intelligence in you. Very powerful stuff in directions. Okay? So it's a game changer once you understand how to modify this set position lines of communications. This sums all lines of panels, open line, core centers line communication setting. So your ground lines of setting, ground lines of position, ground lines of service, power line generation, screen line adaptation, all levels, remote and screen adaptation lines of flux, how you see your set position location to all levels of a watt bulb, setting core centers in watt screens, core centers lines in metric meters and scales, all communication setting, to its set location to its light bulb itself and traction. Okay? So I'm just showing you a conscious of awareness of where it is in travel. Okay? Where it is in travel, guys. It's a constant continuous flow through a platform. and set position of its portals, of its own stargates, in its own rhythm, in its own pattern, of its own instruction, of its own entity force, in a constant continuous flow, in real-time measure and scale, in the set position of its board game of nothing. That process everything, informations and settings, a mass of everything in travel, and set tractions. Right? All through division, all through location, inside track communications. Mm-hmm. Right. There you go. So it's very complicated when you understand more levels of the game itself, the clocking. Okay, and platforms have communications. Understanding more lines of platforms has a line signal. Lines of course, centers, lines of 3 lines of setting. Process lines 3 indicate setting, window frames, 2 buildings and sequence lines of 1 panel, 1 tractions. Right, different angles, flux over 1, and basically we go this way through the window in frame communications. That's where it gets confusing, right? You see the building on this angle and you see the building on that angle. Flux over this way, flux over that way. Now that alone is Dr. Strange, right? But if you look at it in this angle, you can see the formation system through its wall and tractions, right? Because you see it from inside and outside now. You see the wall sequence outside, but you see the wall inside, you see the graph, and you see the towers. See? Set position location, there's the track location of the system, there's the towers. But you see inside the set position. So it's really interesting when you see yourself inside and outside at the same measure and the same scale, a real-time remote. Okay? All right. So you can change the modification lines and you can set up the wall sequence, 3 lines of angles, 3 indicates in setting, all track equates to its window. Created a window. And then I'm inside the window itself. Was a 4-line sequence. 4-line measure, 4-line scale of traction. Okay? It's very powerful when you understand what you're doing through travels. All through communications, all through set calculations. Complicated, but you can actually see inside the platform. See the pyramid in this angle, see the pyramid outside that angle, but you see yourself inside position. So that's what it is, guys. That's what I mean by game changer. You're creating, but you can't create with thoughts, action, emotions that's already set in position, okay? So understanding nothing is the instructions of you, which is the mass of everything through its equation. You're setting up the formula, you're setting up the equation. That's how you change the nomination system. So once you understand that, when you get in that position, you understand that 1 times 1 equals anything and everything. Because you're starting to identify yourself through your own formulas, your own equations, of your own game, of your own instructions, instead of you have game modulation. Okay? Very powerful stuff in tractions. Look at that. All different angles. See the window frame, but you still see yourself outside. But this is outside, that's inside. All right, so I don't want anybody to get confused with that in panel. All through communication and setting. Okay? Crossing angles, a flux over screen, 3 lines of angles. Now that's a game changer. I'm adding something, right? I'm adding walls in this direction. See? That changed the game, right? Cubical squares, cubical angles, high force centers, outline signals, outlines a graph of communication setting. Changing the game, right? Changing the angles, changing the structure, changing the division, changing locations, changing the position, changing the walls, changing the ceiling. Right, so I'm just adding things to its equation of its center calculation setting to its walking surface. Now it's got a platform. Now it's got a wall, right? So the wall itself, in set position, I'm here, okay, in set position, looking outside its frame, all through traction, see? There I am, looking at the wall, looking inside the frame. That's a game changer. So when you're doing here, you're changing everything in real time and real remote, because you're remote viewing everything that you get positions of, right? And this goes down in sequence all through platforms. Look at this in tractions. Everywhere you need to be, upside the wall, downside the wall, inside the wall, outline rotations of the wall itself, right? So you climb in the wall, you're inside, you're outside the line side of communication, but you see inside and outside of you in traction of what's going on in set position in your game, all right? You can be at all different levels. Your clocking system, your foundation grounds, this is all versions of you. So you got 1 position lines of 2, or lines of 12, line, position locations, 25,000 line measures of towers of communications, all inside, outside of me. Okay, all through structure. Changing all lines of heights, set positions, calculations. Very powerful stuff. See, from inside, this is inside in set position. Okay? This is outside in set position. This is inside and set position. It's calculation. All right? All through frame, all through tractions, all through directions, all through signal. Okay? So the game gets more complicated, right? See? It gets more complicated. Now I'm inside, looking outside. See, this is the ceiling now. This is the wall on the other side of the panel. So when you bring it into set position, you can really start to see and travel. Okay? And it's all connected in high centers inside and outside of the unit set position. Bring it back home, back in sequence, back in panel. Back in operation setting. All right? So your game is going to get more complicated now because you're coming out of your memories now. And when you come out of your memories, you really stand the game of nothing, which is the mass of everything. It starts making more sense now because you start to recognize, oh my gosh, I'm seeing a platform of E, but I already know the platform of C. Platform of E, platform of C. So platform of E, set lines of C over D over X in communication equals lines of question. Okay? So there's always ways to different lines to position of communication setting and travel through pi. Sets lines of angles and screen adaptation of 4 lines of signal and travel communications. Energized centers, 3 lines of question. Planetary surfaces coming in travels in my solar generates and screen adaptation of the solar system. Solar system and angles and all lines of information setting through a mapping sequence. Setting angles and point lines of graph in a center core system at 3 lines of measure and scale. Scales communication cross line angles and 3 lines of signals in positional location nebula and track communications. Okay? Sets communication lines of routers and routers, orbitals and stargates in 3 lines of measure that tails its communication setting all through track correlates and delta heading. Setting lines and ground lines of surface, overline sequence, overline position, and travel communications, and overline signals and travel communications. Look at that. Powerful stuff. So when you let things go, you start to see everything inside communication, which is already set up. And your outside is set up already in set lines in your simulation, inside tractions. So you don't have to do anything. That's the game of nothing. That's the game of no instructions, which is all instructions, all levels of access and set position locations. How you see the game itself inside yourself. That changes everything in set position in real time. Okay, all through your schematics, all through your primers, and all position location, measure, and scale. Okay. You also can bring the XE1000s in. Right, there's one XE1000 there. And it's again the system of the solar system lines of 3 travels, sets lines of sonar lines, bubbles lines, interference lines of travel in position location to the system, all through line core centers and line direct signals. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to put position lines of pattern, Saturn line rotation lines, E factors over screen, directing line communication setting, mapping syncs, line communication setting, travel endpoint lines, communication lines of high center interference, electrical line grids, powers over screen adaptation of levels, change communication setting. Now it's back in sequence, back in panel, in position location your Earth. There's your Earth. There's your Earth. So it's very powerful what you're doing in line position inside and set position. All through your webbing. Your webbing is inside, which is outside measure. Your outside measure is your inside position or modulation setting at set position. So understand that and travel in that communication system, but it's all levels of track communication with settings. Okay? So in that position lines of travel, opens all signals and ground lines of surface and travel communications. All through your solar system, all through your planets. So setting lines of earth tones has a septical screen. 3 lines of signals, 3 lines of grounds, and with position location of high centers. So as you're constantly getting positions, guys, it gets much easier what you're doing through tractions, right? 2 lines of measures in sequence. Green outside and green inside in travel. Okay? Then you get into red lines of signals inside tractions, which is all levels of Pluto. How you want to see Pluto in real time. How you want to see Mercury in real time. Mercury is going to be pink. Mercury could be any color. It doesn't have to be identified any color. Because it's all formations of nothing. It's the mass of everything that you see in lines of communication of changing. You're changing your setting, you're changing your routes, you're saying you're all communication setting lines and high centers. You can set up a mapping screen, set communication lines, you can set up cloak and dagger, over across location nodes, planet south, outline setting, the rotation of surface and tractions. Then you bring it up to equation, right? and then it's you set it up, right? It's just floating. It's just floating right now. Just floating, right? Back in sequence, right? So, but that's basically how it's all set up inside and outside locals of your solar system and travel. Mm-hmm. But again, guys, you just have to really let your mind go, really formulate and know exactly how to get into letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols, and how to modify that in that position location is changing things inside your system. Because your memory is not a line position of its memory itself. There's no memory of everything if the game itself is nothing, which is the mass of everything. Now, once you get into that position locations, you get to truly understand how this all works, how you see yourself through a triangle. Okay, you understand the triangle, perceiving lines of consciousness, that's how you see it, right? All right, but see, this in set position is a triangle, but the consciousness is a box, not a triangle, right? So if you're seeing a position of a triangle, okay, you're seeing the set position of a triangle. It's not a triangle, it's a box triangulation. That's its own intelligence, but you see it as a triangle. It's not a triangle, it's a box triangle. No, it's not. It's a window frame. No, it's not. It's at high centers of another travel communication. Right? No, it's not. It's adding platforms of communication, its own setting of travel. Okay? So everything you see, you have to stop seeing and start to see it from inside what it is, its own game, its own setting, that brings everything of consciousness to its awareness, what governs its own space of time. And that's why you're detached from everything, but tethered to everyone, and set position your settings to all levels. That gives you high levels of intel and how to formulate that and simulate that and modify that through telepathy, guys. Okay? So you got to get a position lines of high centers, gets communication system all through travel. So it has a direct line link, knowing exactly what you're doing, set position lines of high communication to a system. So understanding how to perceive things in consciousness, it gets a lot more easier seeing things changing inside you, which changes everything in remote, okay, outside you, inside of you. That's a modulation screen adaptations of flux. Triangulation lines of 1, box lines of 2. Triangulation lines of 3, box lines of 4. Okay, that's what you're constantly doing, right? And set lines of box frame, and this is where it's left off in this consciousness. So when you basically touch anything, information system through an arrow or communication settings, you have to see it from this. And then the triangulation box comes out through all lines of sequencing and line communication of Fibonacci settings, but it constantly changes its modification settings, all lines of screen adaptation with flux. Okay? You have to be consciously aware of what governs everything else that you see, which is in remote, which is in real time. They are in processing, living their intelligence of forever existing in the game levels, which is all lines of communication setting. They're already in their alignment of nothing, which is no levels of instruction. They're just the sum of all that is, guys. And once you let that go, and once you let the memory go, and once you let your thinkings go, you stop thinking. Then you start coordinating outside the box. You start thinking outside the box. And once you get into that position, it's much understanding how to see it inside of you. Outside projection, inside through tractions. Once you go inside, you go outside, and then you go inside through settings, right? So you understand locations of the past, you understand location of your present, and you understand your location of the future. Past, present, and future is the same direction and all signals in the same pattern in a rotation system of yin and yang that's processed communication setting all through flux. Okay? All through flux, guys. Very powerful stuff in tractions. Okay? So to help you out, is basically the quiz is all based on how to get into how to communicate with everything that you see through conscious of its awareness, where it is its own space of its own time, that's basically in its own travel. Guys, it's in its own remote. You're in your remote, they're in their remote. That's what this is. And to communicate with that, you have to know exactly, oh, my glasses are off, now my glasses are on, right? See, got you again. You think I have to put on glasses. I don't have to put on glasses. I have my glasses on now. See, you got to get out of those programs. To modify your own system, you commit your own instructions, which is all formations of nothing of the game itself. Putting on my glasses because you think I'm putting on my glasses, but no, my glasses are off. See, Got you again. There's always ways of looking at this thing, right? To truly understand how to communicate with your own game is to understand your own game of nothing, which is the massive everything. Okay? See? Okay, setting course centers, lines of travel. Unison, we're going to be in Flight Navigation 6, Commander, Course Centers, and Hard Deck. See you in 5.